Welcome to today's Explainer. Look, I really want you to prepare yourself for this one because today, we're not just doing a standard review of some historical event. We are cracking open a terrifying, highly classified government file. I'm going to walk you through a genuinely dark chapter of history, step by step, using the actual facts and documents that honestly were never meant to see the light of day. These pages were supposed to be burned. The names were supposed to be forgotten entirely. But, as you'll see, the truth has a funny way of clawing its way back to the surface. So let's step into the shadows of the MKUltra dossier. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is documented, declassified, and confirmed by the United States government. I want to just absolutely shatter any illusion of safety right off the bat here. For 20 years, the Central Intelligence Agency ran a highly classified clandestine program that experimented on thousands of unwitting citizens. And the craziest part, they didn't target foreign enemies or combatants on some distant battlefield. They targeted their own people, you, me, everyday citizens. Folks who just woke up, drank their coffee, went to work, and went about their lives completely unaware that they were being used as human test subjects in a sweeping, devastating psychological war. 1953, the Cold War origins. So, the year was 1953. The Cold War was at its absolute peak, and paranoia wasn't just a lingering feeling, right? It was the driving force of foreign policy. During the Korean War, American POWs were captured, and something deeply, deeply unsettling started happening. They began making these seemingly voluntary, false confessions on film. While the CIA was terrified, they fully believed the Soviet Union and China had developed advanced, weaponized techniques to literally brainwash people. Driven by this profound fear of falling behind in a totally new kind of clandestine warfare, CIA Director Allen Dulles authorized a highly classified program. The singular, chilling goal to find a way to hack, manipulate, and ultimately control the human mind. They gave it a code name, MKUltra. 20. I really want you to think about what 20 years actually means. This wasn't some brief, fleeting experiment they threw together over a weekend. No, it was a massive, unchecked operation that lasted for 2 entire decades. Just let the heavy weight of that sink in for a second. 20 years spans multiple presidential administrations. It spans the entire era of the Vietnam War. And for all that time, this mind control program operated in the absolute darkest shadows, completely free from public oversight, congressional scrutiny, or even basic moral restraint. We're talking about a generation of unchecked power, 150. Because what started as a defensive research initiative born out of that Cold War anxiety we talked about quickly mutated into something far darker and much, much more expansive. This wasn't just a single isolated test in some hidden underground bunker. MKUltra spawned over 150 separate sub-projects. It was the sprawling, decentralized web of psychological and chemical experimentation. And to make matters worse, many of these projects were disguised as legitimate medical research, meticulously funded through front companies and shadow organizations just to mask their true origin from the public. Over 80 institutions were secretly involved in all this. And we are talking about prestigious Ivy League universities, highly respected hospitals, and federal prisons. Think about that. The very institutions designed to heal the sick, educate the youth, and protect society were completely compromised. The deception was incredibly sophisticated, too. In a lot of cases, the doctors and researchers at these institutions had absolutely no idea their funding was actually coming from the CIA. They were unwittingly executing government operations. Thousands of innocent people walked through the doors of these trusted facilities and literally became human lab rats without ever knowing it. Massive doses of LSD, electroconvulsive therapy, sensory deprivation, hypnosis, and psychological torture. Look, these experiments were conducted without consent, without warning, and without a single shred of mercy. Subjects were unknowingly given massive, debilitating doses of LSD, sometimes literally just slipped right into their morning coffee. Some of them were kept in drug-induced states for consecutive weeks. I mean, imagine the absolute terror of sensory deprivation. Subjects isolated in total darkness and absolute silence for days on end, until their minds literally began to fracture. They endured electroconvulsive therapy at voltages way, way beyond medical norms. Verbal abuse, sexual abuse, intense hypnosis. It was, by every definition of the word, systematic psychological torture. De-patterning, the attempt to erase existing memories and implant new behavioral patterns. Now, behind closed doors, the CIA used this very clinical, bureaucratic term for this horrific process, de-patterning. It was the deliberate attempt to completely erase a subject's existing memories and implant entirely new behavioral patterns. Why? Because they wanted to build the perfect spy. They wanted to create automated couriers who couldn't be interrogated, operatives who could be triggered by a single word. But behind this sterile scientific language was profound, visceral human suffering. To the victims, it wasn't deep patterning. It was the complete, violent destruction of their identities, the total erasure of who they were. The Frank Olson file. You know, it's terribly easy to get lost in the sheer scale of the numbers and all that clinical terminology. So let's ground these terrifying statistics in a single, visceral human tragedy. We're going to open the Frank Olson file. Frank Olson wasn't just an average citizen. He was a highly cleared senior biological warfare scientist working directly for the United States government. And establishing his high-level clearance makes what happened to him even more shocking. His story is perhaps the single most disturbing symbol of what this shadow program was truly capable of when its own people got in the way. So let's look at the timeline. In November of 1953, Frank Olson attended a secluded work retreat with his colleagues. During this retreat, he was secretly dosed with a massive amount of LSD by the very men he worked alongside, without his knowledge and absolutely without his consent. Over the next 9 days, Olson descended into this spiral of intense, unyielding paranoia. He became utterly convinced the CIA was going to silence him. And then 9 days after being dosed, in the dead of night, Olson crashed through a closed 13-story window of a hotel in New York City, plummeting to his death. Decades later, in 1994, his family finally fought to have his body exhumed for a proper independent forensic examination. On the left, you have the official CIA narrative. Suicide. On the right, the forensic reality. Murder, marked by a blow to the head. See, the official CIA narrative was incredibly neat and tidy. They said Frank Olson suffered a tragic mental breakdown from the stress of his job and committed suicide. Case closed, right? But the forensic reality discovered after his exhumation told a far more sinister story. Independent medical examiners found concrete evidence of severe blunt force trauma to Olson's head and chest that occurred before he ever went out that window. The injuries were entirely inconsistent with a simple fall. His family called it exactly what it looked like: murder. And to this day, the Frank Olson case remains officially unsolved, lingering as a dark, bloody stain of a government cover-up. 1973, destroying the evidence. Fast forward 20 years to 1973. The Watergate scandal was erupting across the nation, and an unprecedented wave of intense scrutiny was finally bearing down on the intelligence community. Fearing imminent exposure, CIA Director Richard Helms panicked. Terrified of approaching congressional investigators, he gave a devastating, sweeping order: the complete and total destruction of all MKUltra files. They literally wanted to erase this dark history from existence. The shredders ran day and night. Documents were burned, and for the most part, they actually succeeded in wiping their slate clean. 20,000. Because in 1977, 4 years after that frantic destruction order, an incredible stroke of luck occurred. A routine record search uncovered approximately 20,000 documents relating directly to MKUltra. They had been misfiled in an obscure financial record center. I mean, think about the absolute irony of that for a second. A meticulous, highly sophisticated intelligence agency, capable of toppling foreign governments, was brought down by a mundane clerical error. The truth miraculously survived the purge simply because someone put the files in the wrong box. Those surviving documents literally changed the course of history. They triggered the explosive 1977 Senate hearings. Just imagine the absolute shock of the public and the senators themselves as they sat in those chambers and realized that the darkest, most paranoid ravings of conspiracy theorists were, in fact, absolute reality. The files laid bare the undeniable truth, forcing the government to publicly admit to the unimaginable atrocities they had committed against their own citizens. Institutional, systematic, authorized. Before we wrap up, I really need you to remember those 3 key words. The MKUltra program wasn't the work of a few rogue agents acting out of bounds in some hidden basement. It wasn't a lone conspiracy or a localized mistake. It involved the absolute highest levels of a democratic government. It was fully funded by taxpayer dollars, fully authorized by agency directors, and meticulously systematic in its execution. The system didn't break down here. The system functioned exactly as it was designed to. If it happened once, what makes you certain it ended? MKUltra officially ended in 1973. But we have to ask, how many files were actually destroyed in those incinerators? How many unknown victims were never identified and just lived out the rest of their lives in quiet agony? And what happened to the advanced psychological techniques that they successfully developed over those 2 decades? If it happened once, fully funded, and under the watch of a democratic government, what makes you certain it ever truly ended? The archive is full of files exactly like this one. If you want to uncover the reality hiding behind the shadows, subscribe to Dark Archive. because the archive is open.